So I'm going to assume that they told you that I get to ask you 2 questions, and then you get to pick one out of the fishbowl.
Okay.
So before we talk about some big issues, can you start by telling us about yourself and why you want to be governor?
Sure. So my name is Ben Jealous. I'm the former national president of the NAACP. I'm running for governor because Maryland's been good to my family, and I want to make sure that our state is good to working families for generations to come. My family moved here almost 80 years ago from Southern Virginia. Granddad to work the B&O Railroad, Grandma to work for Planned Parenthood in 1941. They moved into the housing projects of West Baltimore, and, well, a generation later, there they were at Dulles Airport waving goodbye to me as I flew off to be a Rhodes Scholar. Oh, thank you. Yeah, my public school teachers are still wondering how that happened. And what I'll tell you is this. I can't explain. I mean, we've lived that dream, that Maryland dream that's a little easier than the American dream is in other places because our state's always been a little better. But I can't explain it without schools that were always strong and getting stronger, not weaker. And with great public education all the way through. You know, what made it possible for my grandparents to ultimately go from answering phones at Planned Parenthood and being a dishwasher on the railroad to being, respectively, a social worker and a probation officer was that Maryland paid for their public higher education. At a time before mass incarceration, when our public higher education was free or almost free. And so you can count on me as somebody whose family has benefited immensely from our public school system all the way through to fight to make sure that we, in these days where we underinvest in our educators and we underinvest in our university students and we drive them into debt. We will end both of those when I'm governor.
Okay, question 2. What is your vision for public education? How will you prioritize your education initiatives in light of the work the Kirwan Commission is doing and their expected recommendations later this year?
You know, this struggle for me is personal. I have 2 kids in the public schools in our state. And while my mom sued Western High School for girls in Baltimore when she was 12, so she could desegregate it in 1955 when she was 15. And what families who are involved in that litigation know is that our lawyers, who are ultimately guided by Thurgood Marshall, understood that unless we were willing to also have funding equity, we could never win. And so I'm running for governor to finish what my mama helped start and to make sure that all of our schools are well funded, that every school is a great school and every child gets a great education. And what does that mean? That means that, first of all, we got to keep our promise on the casino money and the lottery money. And we have to use that funding. See, when you look at the so-called racial achievement gap, which is really, if we're honest, part of a much bigger class-based achievement gap, what you see in West Baltimore, you'll see in Cumberland, you'll see in Salisbury, it's not always black and brown kids. There are a lot of poor white kids who are getting undereducated too. Is that the number one way to close that gap is to invest in having a great teacher in every classroom, great educators in every school. And if you're going to have great educators in every school, then you've got to be willing to pay a competitive wage. And if you're going to do that, then you have to have the courage on the budget to push first things first. And yes, if we're undereducating our schools by a sum that amounts to, if we're underfunding our schools by a sum that amounts to 5% of our overall budget, then we have to figure out how to better manage our overall budget to find that 5%. Because we also are going to need to make sure our kids show up to kindergarten ready to learn. That means full-day universal pre-K and ideally universal 3K. It means learning from other cities and other states and other countries where they're investing in parent educators to help parents prepare young children. It means investing in our home-based daycare providers. But it also means having a different vision for how we educate for the trade. So we're preparing children to be career ready, which may be college ready, or it may be that you're halfway through an apprenticeship to become a plumber.
Okay. So now we have a few minutes. You get to start picking questions. If you pick one and hand it to me, I'll read it and we'll await your answer. What was your favorite subject in high school?
History.
Pick another. A lot of happy history teachers out there. What education idea isn't discussed very often that you wish was talked about more?
We need to recognize that the underperformance of the American education system is fundamentally about our failure to support low-income children. Singapore leads the world in K-12 educational outcomes because the gap between their poor children and their rich children is 4 times smaller than it is in our country. If we're going to push our country back to first, it means we have to lift all of our children up.
Pick another one. We'll just keep going until we run out of time.
I'm going to hold it in my hand and just deal them to you.
Personally or professionally, what is your proudest accomplishment?
My proudest accomplishment is having been the youngest NAACP president in history. And as the Chronicle of Philanthropy said on the front page when I stepped down, jealous leaves NAACP a far stronger place.
We may go through all of them. I don't even know what they all say. Who is your political role model?
Doug Wilder.
Wow. Virginia governor?
You know, if Virginia built a campaign of working families to break the color barrier at their state capitol like 30 years ago, I think maybe we should try to catch up.
What is the top lesson you learned from the 2016 election?
Top lesson I learned is that those voters who voted Obama, Trump, who tended to be white and working class, and those voters who voted Obama, and didn't vote, who tended to be black and brown and working class, each felt betrayed on the economy. As Democrats, if we're going to get back to winning, we have to get back to being Democrats. And that means that we have to have the courage to stand up to Wall Street and to Big Pharma and say that, yes, we are the party to advance civil rights and we are the party to expand economic opportunity, but we are also the party that will end poverty in our country.
What's the last book you read?
The last book I read was Young Men in Fire by Norman MacLean. It's about the first group of smoke jumpers who are kind of an elite group of forest firefighters.
We're on the last question. If you could only pick one thing, what would you most like to reverse that Governor Hogan has done in the last 3 years?
Oh, geez. You know, if it's one thing, it's him being governor. And I got 53 more seconds, so let me tell you how we're going to do that. I've been endorsed by SEIU and the communication workers and the postal workers, the nurses, Friends of the Earth, Bill McKibben, Bernie Sanders, Cory Booker. Bernie Sanders and Cory Booker, think about that. We're going to build a movement of working families across this state, and we're going to turn out Democrats by being Democrats. I'm the only candidate. Larry Hogan has made sure that the National Republican Governor Association attacks pretty much weekly the last few months. And it's because he knows that we built a team to turn out voters, and he's only in office because voters didn't turn out. 7 seconds. When I was president of the NAACP, Van Jones on CNN called the NAACP under my leadership the unsung heroes of Obama's re-election because we turned out 1.4 million unlikely voters. To beat Larry Hogan, we've got to turn out 125,000 more likely voters. We'll beat them doing that, and we'll wallop them turning out unlikely voters. Thank you. God bless.